Good afternoon and welcome to the Scottish Parliament. As you can see, our meeting this afternoon is entirely online. And we're going to begin with a statement from Fergus Ewing, the Cabinet Secretary for Rural Economy and Tourism, on managing Scotland's fisheries in the future. The Cabinet Secretary will take questions following his statement, and I would invite the Cabinet Secretary, Fergus Ewing, to give his statement.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. 2020 will be remembered for all the wrong reasons, and the 24th December 2020 will be remembered as the day that the UK government sold out Scottish fishing interests in the most egregious way. The outcome of the negotiations exposed to all and sundry that the promises that were made to fishermen in Scotland and indeed throughout the UK have been broken. On 29th December, the Scottish Government published its analysis of the impact of the Brexit trade deal's measures for fishing and for seafood. That analysis details stock by stock, fishing area by fishing area, the results in terms of actual fish landed, and shows that there will be major reductions in certain of these, including North Sea whitefish stocks. Remarkably, the Scottish industry will now have access to fewer fishing opportunities than under the existing common fisheries policy arrangements, even at the end of the 5.5-year adjustment period. So the UK government negotiated away existing quota share for whitefish stocks, amongst the most important to our fishing industry, including onshore interests, with over 90% of what is being caught landed at harbours and fish markets in Scotland and then processed here for sale. To compound these shortfalls, full access to our waters has been granted to the EU, leaving little, if any, negotiating capital in forthcoming negotiations, where we would seek to redress these shortfalls. Presiding Officer, the Tories promised Scotland's fishermen a sea of opportunity. Instead, they have effectively made our seas gang dry. As Elspeth MacDonald, the Chief Executive of the Scottish Fishermen's Federation, put it, the UK is now a coastal state with one hand tied behind its back. These broken promises leave our fishermen woefully short of their expectations, and their sense of betrayal is evident in their responses. Mike Park talked about how the members of the Scottish Whitefish Producers Association were deeply aggrieved at the very challenging situation that they now face for 2021. John Anderson, Chief Executive of the Scottish Fishermen's Organisation, described it as capitulation on a monumental scale. Of course, it's not the Tories who have to play the appalling hand that they have dealt here. That, Presiding Officer, is left to us. We have to pick ourselves up and work out how best to manage this situation. I've already met with key industry leaders to discuss how we work together to mitigate the shortfall in available quota and deliver the best possible management structures in our waters. Presiding Officer, we face a bleak future, but the one bright spot is the fact that we have secured direct involvement for Scottish officials in the annual negotiations. So my officials are working flat out to identify new and creative ways to plug the many quota shortfalls we now find ourselves with. Going forward, we will apply our expertise and knowledge and do our best to prevent the UK government trading away any of our interests to protect their own. Our priority will be to redress the balance of Scottish waters and stocks being used as negotiating currency without delivering tangible benefits to the Scottish fishing industry. And let me lay down this warning. We have long experience of the UK government trading away Scottish interests to secure their own in annual negotiations. Any attempt by them to correct their own failings through the upcoming bilateral negotiations at Scotland's expense will be resisted utterly and publicised relentlessly. This week's TAC setting negotiations on the jointly managed stocks with the EU and Norway began on Tuesday, and I expect that negotiations with Norway and the EU on bilateral arrangements will soon follow. Discussions with Faroe on a bilateral arrangement are already underway, although not concluded. We will promote and support action that helps to recover stocks by introducing appropriate management measures, reducing discarding, and addressing choked species. We will fight for what is fair and deliver in partnership with industry a progressive but practical catching policy as part of our strategy on the future management of Scotland's fisheries. The strategy I published on the 17th of December sets a course to deliver our vision for Scotland to be a world-class fishing nation. That vision is centred on key themes: transparency, accountability, resilience and responsibility, and of course, sustainability. I'm clear we'll work with all stakeholders to deliver the 12-point action plan in that strategy. Crucially, I and this government will do all we can to defend our devolved fisheries powers, and that includes pressing for Scotland to get its fair share of future funding for fisheries and marine, which we believe should be 62 million, but the UK offer is a paltry 14 million, much of which would go on other functions such as compliance. Same applies to their new £100 million fund. Scotland's share is 60 million, and we need it devolved in full right now to determine how best to meet our needs and our interests. But there's one overriding immediate pressure that must be addressed. You'll be aware of the terrible impact of the new rules for exporting seafood is having, not just on export businesses, but on fish markets and the catch industry too. Yesterday I wrote to George Eustace demanding that the UK government delivers on its promise, pay all the costs of Brexit and provide compensation to help all these businesses. These jobs and livelihoods might not matter to the Tories, but they do matter to Scotland. I understand that the Prime Minister indicated that compensation would be forthcoming. That needs to happen, and it needs to happen now. I extracted this concession after rattling the cages of Whitehall in representing Scotland at their meeting yesterday. And we need much more urgency and effort from the UK government to resolve the system problems that are stopping and delaying exports. Presiding Officer, papers reveal that on the way into the EU, Edward Heath's Tory government considered Scotland's fishing interests as, quotes, expendable. On the way out, the Tories have made them expendable again. They've delivered a shocking deal for our catching industry that offers no succour in any part. They ignored ours and the food and drink sector's warning about the impact of customs barriers, and they ignored calls for a grace period of 6 months. 13 days into Brexit, and they're yet to lift a finger to help our businesses. And they're failing even to match the funding envelope we got under the EMF. Presiding Officer, Brexit is a bourach, and its pathways are littered with broken Tory promises. But this government will do better. We don't overpromise and underdeliver. All we can do is offer our coastal communities and everybody working in Scotland's fishing industry, offshore, inshore and onshore, this. We won't stop trying. We will try and do our best using our skills and expertise to get the best possible outcome from the annual negotiations. We will try our hardest to get the UK government to do right by you and fix some of the mess it has created. And we will work to ensure that they compensate you for your Brexit losses. And we will try to build a brighter future than the one the UK government has delivered for our fisheries by working with you to deliver our strategy and our action plan. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, when I became Rural Economy Secretary, I promised to champion and fight for the interests of Scottish fishing, and that is what I and this government will continue to do.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. Now, Mr Ewing will take questions. The first question will be from Jamie Halker-Johnson, to be followed by Colin Smith. Jamie Halker-Johnson.
Thank you. I thank the Cabinet Secretary for advance sight of his statement. Despite Mr Ewing's claims he and his government will do all they can to defend devolved fisheries powers, the simple truth is this. Mr Ewing and the SNP would hand those fisheries powers back to Brussels, would have Scotland's fishermen back in the common fisheries policy just as soon as they can. But, Presiding Officer, it is clear that the sector has faced considerable problems in recent days, compounding some of the border issues related to the coronavirus from before Christmas, with a number of boats opting to stay in port because of uncertainty over whether their catch can be exported in time. There have been a range of issues with customs declarations and IT issues playing a part. Within the Scottish Government's area of competence, we've heard of delays in granting export licences as certificates at the Larkhall Seafood Hub. On the 19th of August, Fergus Ewing said, "We will be prepared as we can for the end of the transition period." So does he admit now that that was not the case and that the Scottish Government weren't as prepared as they should have been. And I hope that the Cabinet Secretary will give a personal commitment to work with Food Standards Scotland to see that these problems are addressed. And will he commit to a date by which his officials will iron out these problems? And what is also increasingly apparent is that short-term support for those businesses which have been impacted by losses will be vital. So will the Cabinet Secretary put aside the party politics for now, recognise the need for support backed by both governments, and will he work with his UK counterparts in the government, UK government, to make sure that that essential support can get to our fishing industry as quickly as possible?
Thank you. Cabinet Secretary.
Well, Presiding Officer, first it would be churlish of me not to invite Mr Harper-Johnston to his new responsibilities. In response to his questions, could I say that we have already been working with all parties, Food Standards Scotland, night and day, working round the clock to do our best to ameliorate the problems that have arisen. The fact is that the industry asked for a grace period of 6 months. Scotland's Food and Drink and others representing all the major sectors of industry sought a grace period of 6 months, Presiding Officer, in which any teething problems could be ironed out and new systems, untried and untested, 150,000 new environmental health certificates required every year, that the new system could be worked through and difficulties with it sorted out. That request wasn't even responded to when on 4th of November it was made by Scotland Food and Drink to the Prime Minister. There was a subsequent meeting with junior ministers where it was dismissed out of hand. As far as the Tories are concerned, I do notice that Mr Harper-Johnston doesn't actually say whether he says that the deal is a good deal, whether it offers unparalleled opportunities, which was the phrase used by the Prime Minister just yesterday, I believe, or whether he agrees with the fishing representatives that it is a betrayal, a dreadful deal, and one which has utterly broken the promises that were made to the Scottish fishing industry. But in conclusion, Presiding Officer, yes, of course, I've been working with the UK government for the last 5 years. I've suggested a grace period. I've suggested various things. They have rejected all these suggestions. And the situation in which we now find ourselves is entirely as a result of Brexit and a lack of preparation by the UK government for the bureaucratic system within which the seafood sector now finds itself enmeshed.
Thank you. Colin Smith to be followed by Stuart Stevenson. Colin Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I also thank the Cabinet Secretary for the advance sight of his statement. The fact that the Brexit trade deal is neither what Scotland's fishing sector needed or were promised, it won't surprise anyone. And the devastating delays they currently face were entirely predictable. There is anger, Presiding Officer, there's frustration from our fishers who have been badly let down. But, Presiding Officer, they don't want to be used as a constitutional football between two governments. They want solutions and they want them now. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary, in addition to rightly raising concerns with the UK government over the need for compensation and to tackle the bureaucratic burdens currently crippling the sector, can the Cabinet Secretary tell us specifically what additional resources the Scottish Government are bringing to the table to speed up those checks the Scottish Government agencies have responsibility for? And will there also specifically be additional financial support for the sector from the Scottish Government to get them through these difficult next few months?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I thank Mr Smith for his question. In response to the last part, I do believe that the Prime Minister has promised compensation. That compensation must be paid very quickly. I spoke to one business this morning that said that if they have a repetition of the problems in the last 2 weeks, they may not be in business next week. That story could be repeated many, many times. Fishing vessels are landing their catch in Denmark now to avoid the bureaucratic system. Prices have collapsed for the caught fish sector by 50% or more. Trade deals have been lost and customers gone elsewhere. This is a truly dreadful situation, and I have been in regular contact attending the EXO meetings chaired by Michael Gove. And of course, we have, to answer the first part of Mr Smith's question, Presiding Officer, prepared extensively in every respect that we could, in all ways that we required, in order to ensure that, so far as within our power, the new system was capable of operating. In that respect, we set up 3 hubs, including one at DFDS, to streamline the system. We've ensured availability of environmental health officers. Presiding Officer, actually, it wouldn't matter if there was another 1,000 certifying officers. That is not the problem. The problem is an untried, untested system, which the UK government say is only now being tested. They said that at the meeting I was at yesterday. The paperwork, the IT systems are incompatible with each other. The customs documentation is defective. The HMRC doesn't recognise particular types of fishing stocks actually even exist. And there's been a complete failure to establish a good rapport relationship and working operation with the French authorities. So in all respects, Presiding Officer, it lies with the UK government to sort out this Brexit bourach that they have created, and to do so without any further delay.
Thank you. Stuart Stevenson, to be followed by Finlay Carson.
Cabinet Secretary, this morning, as for many days, Peterhead Market was eerily quiet, Europe's biggest white fish market. And this morning on the radio, we heard David Ducote being attacked by a representative of the industry as a liar. He rejected that, as you might expect. And of course, on Christmas Eve, we gather that Victoria Prentice was spending time preparing for Christmas and not reading the agreement to which she was party. So, Cabinet Secretary, do you expect next time you meet representatives of the UK government, be it Victoria Prentice or David Ducote, a minister at the Scottish office, do you expect them to remain in office for very long? Because the industry is very clear, it's time for them to go.
Cabinet Secretary, although I'm not entirely convinced that the UK government ministers are your responsibility, but a brief answer, Cabinet Secretary.
Well, they're not, but I think the important thing here is that we work to sort out these problems as best we can. I've been doing my best to do that, and will attend a meeting with Mr. Gove again later this afternoon, Presiding Officer, to that end. But the deal that has been done, and reference was made to the actual deal itself there, has seen the loss of the Hague preference. It's seen extra quota only of paper fish, in other words, extra quota which will never actually be of any practical benefit. It's seen that the Scottish industry have lost the option of buying or swapping extra quota. We have lost the negotiating leverage that we have because EU vessels have automatic access to our grounds, and we face in 5 years' time a retaliatory clause where if the EU don't get what they want, they can start imposing tariffs on aquaculture and then on other matters as well. So this really is a rotten deal. To answer Mr. Stevenson's question, I think what the fishermen expect is a bit of honesty. Just one Tory parliamentarian to acknowledge that this is a bad deal. But I haven't seen any sign that any Tory parliamentarian, whether here or in Westminster, has got the guts to be honest to the Scottish fishermen that they have betrayed.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Finlay Carson, to be followed by Alistair Allen. Finlay Carson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm disappointed but not surprised that Mr Ewing has taken this parliamentary time for one of his infamous rages rather than come up with solutions to what should be short-term issues. The Cabinet Secretary, famous for over-promising and under-delivering on R100 and failing to resign. But this statement has little to do with future fisheries management or offering any immediate support for the fishing industry, including the hugely important Scallop industry in my constituency of Galloway and Western Fleece. We all across this chamber want to support the fishing and fish processing industries in Scotland at this challenging time. On that basis, can the Cabinet Secretary outline what action he has taken in the last 48 hours to address the issues at Larkhall Seafood Hub with regards to the granting of export health certificates, which are now required for goods to enter the EU, given that Food Standards Scotland are the responsible body and come under the auspices of the Scottish Government?
Cabinet Secretary.
First of all, Presiding Officer, the allegation about R100 is nonsense. The R100 commitments will be fulfilled with the Scottish Government, as Mr Wheelhouse made clear in his statement last August. Second of all, answering the relevant questions that were posed, or at least on topic questions. Food Standards Scotland, and I've spoken to them several times in the last 2 weeks, are working around the clock with DFDS and with industry. They, and at my specific behest, are working very closely with industry to assist industry, in particular businesses, to enable them to complete the extremely complex sets of documents. And I have actually one of the documents here. It's 60 pages long, Presiding Officer. I went through it this morning myself so that I could understand what they've got to do. FSS are helping businesses to work out how correctly to complete the documentation because they are so complex. But even if they overcome that hurdle, they find that there are problems such as the HMRC doesn't recognise particular types of fish, that the IT systems are incompatible, that there's all sorts of bureaucratic problems at the UK border. And therefore, the suggestion that the Scottish Government has failed to prepare or failed to provide adequate personnel is simply untrue. And it is not one that I've seen any UK minister seriously advance. The fact is, Presiding Officer, these problems must be sorted out. And yesterday, I suggested to Mr. Gove that he really must get a grip of this. And they must end the complacent approach, which included a presentation to their committee that the majority of deliveries are going okay across the channel. Well, not from Scotland, they are not. And therefore, it is absolutely essential that the UK government sort out the Brexit mess that they have created.
Thank you. Alistair Allen to be followed by Claudia Beamish.
Presiding Officer, new regulatory delays are having an impact on the fishing industry in my constituency. I understand that hauliers are now having to leave a day early in order to make connections in time. Produce has had to be left in many cases behind, and that some vessels have simply been told to stop fishing. The total financial cost of all this to coastal communities is yet to be known. However, does the Cabinet Secretary agree with me that while fishermen had justified grievances with the Common Fisheries Policy, in this Brexit red tape, the Tories have delivered medicine that is truly worse than the disease?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, yes, I do. And I mean, it gives me absolutely no pleasure to say so, but we warned the UK government about the risk of the new bureaucratic system, the estimated 150,000 new certificates that would be required, and in combination with other documentation that is necessary, all entirely new and all only necessary because of Brexit. And I couldn't put the issue better than James Withers of Scotland Food and Drink, who described business as, quote, being strangled by the very red tape that we were promised we were escaping from. And that, sadly, is where we are at the moment. And the short-term priority is to sort out these problems PDQ. But if we don't, as we have heard already from numerous businesses, let's not forget the shellfish and the aquaculture businesses, as well as the cod sector, that these businesses are finding they cannot sell their produce. They are losing money hand over fist. They urgently require these problems to be sorted out, and they're also entitled to compensation from the UK government.
Thank you. We've got 7 more questioners, potential questioners, in about 7 minutes. So some succinct question and answers, please. Claudia Beamish to be followed by Rona Mackay.
Thank you. That the 2015 inshore fisheries strategy has been a failure in the main, and the leaked SNH report shows that most regions have suffered declines over the past 10 years. What is the Cabinet Secretary doing to correct the years of delay in designating MPA and priority marine features, the development of management arrangements, and to address the proper monitoring of these sites?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, that is primarily the responsibility of my friend and colleague Rosanna Cunningham, but I can say that for my part, we have and we are in the process of beginning to implement the remote electronic monitoring equipment, which is designed, of course, to improve the sustainable fisheries, and I believe will be a tremendous advantage to fisheries, particularly in the West Coast, Presiding Officer, once it is implemented in a very short time.
Thank you. Rona Mackay to be followed by Beatrice Wishart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The UK Government is claiming that we'll be able to make up the shortfalls in fishing opportunities when the agreement ends in 5.5 years' time. Is that correct?
The Secretary.
No, it's not. The retaliatory clause means that at the end of that 5-year period, if the EU don't get what they want in terms of a fisheries deal, they can impose tariffs. They can immediately apply sanctions to aquaculture, which is entirely separate from the cod sector, for example. The fact that such a clause was included, linking tariffs and trade to fisheries, is a clear breach of numerous promises made by innumerable Conservative MPs and ministers. But more important than that, is deeply damaging to the future prospects and the long-term prospects of Scotland's fisheries.
Thank you. Beatrice Wishart, to be followed by Emma Harper.
Like the rest of the fishing industry, the Shetland Fleet's bitterly disappointed by the content of the fisheries agreement. Can the Minister assure the fishing industry that it will be fully involved in designing a workable catching policy to replace the CFP landing obligation, and that policy papers like that published by the Shetland Fishermen's Association in April 29, entitled A New Approach to Discards in Scotland, and other proposals derived from the reality of operations at sea, will be treated with the utmost seriousness?
Cabinet Secretary.
A series of very fair points, and I give my undertaking that we will do precisely that.
Thank you. Emma Harper, to be followed by Mark Ruskell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This morning I spoke to West Coast Sea Products in Kirkcudbright, a major scallop exporter and employer who now have to register for VAT in France as a result of Brexit. And West Coast Sea Products have lost thousands of pounds because the UK Government failed to ensure a workable system was in place ahead of January the 1st. Could the Cabinet Secretary outline whether the UK Government have indicated how they will fix this mountain of mayhem which they caused, and whether the Scottish Government are able to put any mitigation measures in place to protect the Scottish inshore exporters?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, the inshore sector, the shellfish sector, is extremely important to many communities in Scotland, including those represented by Emma Harper, and we are doing everything we can to support them. And indeed, the inshore sector were amongst the very first in the UK to receive COVID compensation support, Presiding Officer, thanks to the diligence and efficiency of Marine Scotland. But I do think that the 6 months grace period I alluded to earlier would have allowed these teething problems to be resolved in a practical fashion. It was rejected out of hand. However, I now believe that a derogation, which many in the industry are calling for, is probably the only way to see these problems resolved immediately. And therefore, it is incumbent on the UK Government immediately to consider urgently seeking such a derogation to allow the difficulties that Emma Harper has described to be resolved.
Thank you. Mark Ruskell, to be followed by Maureen Wood.
The Secretary has already highlighted the importance of the creeling sector, but last week the Court of Session ruled that the Scottish Government had unfairly rejected proposals from the Scottish Creel Fishermen's Federation for a sustainable fisheries pilot in the Sound of Skye. Will the Cabinet Secretary now commit to reconsidering that proposal from the SDFF?
Cabinet Secretary.
The judgment was made last week, and obviously we need very carefully to consider that judgment, Presiding Officer, and take matters from there. And therefore it would not be appropriate for me to comment on a live legal process. However, I would say this, that we work very closely with the majority of stakeholders that represent the interests in inshore fishing around our coast. We have excellent relationships with almost all of them, and we have proceeded with pilots in accordance with working arrangements with them. And therefore, I believe that we have achieved a great deal working with those who represent our fishermen along the west coast and islands, and we will continue to work in collaboration and coordination with them, as indeed our discussion paper undertakes.
Thank you. And Maureen Watt, to be followed by John Scott. Maureen Watt.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Cabinet Secretary will recall Michael Gove a few months ago specifically reassuring Scottish fresh produce exporters that they would get priority access, given that now they can't even get out of Scotland because of UK IT problems. Wasn't that just another empty bluster on behalf of the Brexiteer Johnson government, hell-bent on destroying Scotland's food and drink exports?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, the promise of providing a prioritisation and fast track has not been implemented, and that's a matter of some sadness. I think I would refer to the earlier answers whereby I personally want to see the problems that exist at the moment overcome rapidly, because if not, the commercial damage, the loss and injury to businesses and people will simply be on an enormous scale, because these difficulties are unlikely to be capable of being resolved in a short period unless there is some grace period or derogation granted, Presiding Officer. And I do very much hope, therefore, that we can jolt the UK government out of its complacent attitude and get them to take this issue as seriously as it deserves and Scotland's fishing communities deserve.
And John Scott to be followed by Peter Chapman.
Manchester's Fishermen's Association. I would like to ask the Cabinet Secretary what's being done to protect and help the prawn fisheries in the Clyde at this awkward time.
Cabinet Secretary.
It's a very fair question from Mr. Scott. The prawn sector has faced extreme difficulties, as I'm sure he is well aware, and therefore I've set up under Yule Norton a task force in order to consider how in practice Mr. Scott, we can do in practice to assist this sector, which even before Brexit was having considerable difficulties in marketing its produce. We have provided financial support, as I alluded to earlier, but that in itself will not be sufficient, I fear. And therefore, I'm ready and willing to work with Mr. Scott and MSPs and all parties that represent the prawn fleet in the west coast of Scotland and elsewhere to the best of my ability, and to try to find practical ways in which we can tide them through the period of difficulties, of trading difficulties and other problems that they have had to endure.
Thank you.
Thank you. And my apologies to Peter Chapman, as I meant to call him earlier. Peter Chapman, our last question.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In his statement, the Cabinet Secretary makes much about helping the industry going forward to make this fishing agreement as good as possible for our fishermen. Now, one of the most important issues that needs to be reinstated is the seamless exchange of international quota between the UK and other EU nations. So can I have the Cabinet Secretary's assurance that he and his officials will start work immediately to put this vital piece of legislation back in place?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, if Mr. Chapman is referring to the ability to do quota swaps, then that is an ability which industry has lost as a result of the trade agreement. There is still the possibility that at government level, coastal states can agree arrangements, but that is a poor substitute for the arrangements where industry make their own deals on a regular, indeed day-to-day basis. Last year, I believe my officials tell me there were around 140 such deals. The new system is far more bureaucratic, untried, untested, unfamiliar, and does not offer the flexibility and the opportunity that producer organisations currently enjoy in order to make sure that fishermen are able to continue to fish in Scotland because they have sufficient quota there too. That's one of the most problematic provisions of the trade agreement to which the Prime Minister agreed.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary and members, and thanks for your cooperation. We managed to squeeze in all the questions.